Nazli, Choucri, Professor of Political Science at MIT, and I head the new research program on what we call Cyber IR at MIT. It's a work at the intersection of cyberspace and international politics, and the convergence of, with respect to a potential Wild West is very clear. So I've been asked to talk about moving towards, what has to be done to move towards the social contract 2020, safety, security, etc. of the AI world. It's kind of a drafting exercise, but it's one that is fraught with issues that we have to deal with sooner or later, and sooner is probably better than later. So my comments are really in four, I hope very brief, terms. The first is just to remind you of some of the advances, and you're very familiar with all these, of AI that alter, that change our conventional way of managing society and managing law and order. It's the alteration that is relevant here. Second point is to share with you stuff that you already know, but I'd like to highlight its implications, singling out some of the opaque features of AI. And the third is to highlight trade-offs, focus on some of the trade-offs, or decision trade-offs that have to be made on the technology side and on the policy side that are relevant to the social contract. And then I'll end up my fourth point with suggesting some core anchors or core principles for the next steps. And all of this is early thinking, but I think that it's based on the work that has been done with this group for a couple of years now, a year and a half now, something like that. So let me start with advances that in AI that call for some response. And I'm not going to say regulatory, but I will say some response in terms of social response. We know that we understand more or less the scale and scope of advances in IR. We know that we have to manage embedded insecurities, but we're not quite sure what those are. And we know that it's our responsibility to think about safety and security. That's all perfect. We know all that. But we're less attuned to the speed at which AI, technological innovations, and applications have moved. So the rates of change that we know have a disconnect with social and policy rates of change, something we have to consider. We have to remember that we are at the beginning of a world of mind-machine convergence with biological drivers for both mind and for machine. So it's a big mess that we have to sort out, and we do that in different ways, depending on what our inclinations are. But if we are serious about framing the outline of a social contract for the international system as a whole, then it's our responsibility to kind of provide some order, at least get some agreement on what is it yeah. Now there is one piece of technological innovations around which there's a lot of controversy, but sooner or later some breakthrough might be made, and that is the issue of consciousness of AI technologies. Missing now is consciousness, empathy, etc. I'm not a technologist, but I see that coming as an issue not too far from here. And here from now, we're also at the frontier of biological intelligence, as I mentioned, and machine intelligence. Then the question becomes really, intelligence in both those areas, are they more or less the same? Academic, but somewhat relevant. The point of all this is that these changes are making possible new forms and new sources of design space. And the design space that we want to think about is social contract, the policy context. And I'd like to say social contract because it's a consensus notion. It's not hierarchical regulatory. If it becomes effective, if it works out, then it can be incorporated in legal frames nationally and internationally. Now, let me move to some of the dilemmas we have, and I call them trade-offs. In the best of all possible world, we would want everything. But at that point, there are at least 7 thorny trade-offs between, at the intersection of AI and society. The first is the trade-off between performance and explicability. We know they do things. Things are done. Don't quite understand the process. Trade-off between efficiency and equality, between growth and sustainability, between convenience and safety. I have to tell you that this is an important one because most of us, I will admit to preferring convenience than safety. Just get this thing done, even if it's not. I haven't worried about my own safety, and I suspect that it's generalizable. The next trade-off is a little bit more thorny because it's highly political, and that is the trade-off between power and accountability. We're kind of short on accountability in cases where power is very, very high and very strong. I'm almost there at the end. Between regulation and innovation, especially in technological areas where innovation, we want the innovations, we don't want to regulate, but we want to make sure that some standards of safety, blah, blah, blah. You know the text. And then finally, between innovation and order, social order. And that brings us back to the social contract. I haven't used the word ethics, so I would ask you, where do we put ethics? Do ethics matter? Yeah, I guess it's plural. Do ethics matter? We're very much aware of the importance of these issues in the context of innovations that make life very, very easy for us, and use the internet as a case in point. And after its complete success, give or take, we recognize there are other problems that we have dealing with. So the dilemma for the social contract is how to respond to unknowns that come out of the very successful innovations. All right, so now let me very briefly sketch out the what, why, who, and how of the social contract for 2020. So what? The what is, there's a long tradition of consensus building for order. And in this case, the vision is one built on reinforcing consensus and accord if possible, not pushing too prematurely for regulation or for legislation. But it's necessary to have consensus before you can even introduce notions of control, management, and the like. So, moving now to the issue of what is the nature of a social contract? What are we talking about here? What is at issue? At issue is the relationship among people, governments, legislatures, parliaments, judiciaries, etc., civil society, NGOs, and the like. And I list them as if they were of equal importance in society. They're not now of equal importance, but in the vision that we're developing, they're really, it's essential to think of them as equal participants. Now, why? Why a social contract? Because the objective is to find points of convergence where we can clarify, articulate, understand the contentions, and then try to converge. Now, the question of who should be at the table, I've just listed the various participants, including, which I have not mentioned, very, very important, including individuals. And by that I mean and me as an individual as opposed to part of an institution. So, now how, and I'm very close to the end here, the how that I'd like to highlight is, it is time to start articulating and sharing some fundamental principles for upon which a social contract can be based, anchors, if you wish. What I'd like to propose is, at this point, there seem to be at least three very obvious anchors. Anchors being critical assumptions that we move from, then we worry about what happens after that. The first is to use a precautionary principle for innovations and for applications in OIR. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this. This is one that evolved early on in the environmental movement. And the trick here is to support, but not to impede innovation. And the point here is there's a difference between thinking of the precautionary principle as a principle that can go into law at some point versus a pragmatic idea that is an approach. But precaution, in any way you want to think about it, might be very useful as an anchor. The second principle is also very obvious and very important, and that is the principle of fairness and justice throughout the social order. This sounds like motherhood and apple pie. It really is not quite, because if we're trying to build consensus on responding to the new ecology that we find ourselves in, then we can't put aside fairness and we can't put aside justice. And then the third and final one, referred to earlier in one of the trade-offs, is to build in an understanding of responsibility and accountability for policy and decisions in both the private and the public sectors, actors. Accountability, we've got a low on accountability at this point in time, and my conclusion is we cannot move ahead without a clear understanding of responsibility and accountability, or a clear consensus on responsibility and accountability. So voila, this is what I have to share with you. And I would like to ask you, okay, what's missing and what you object to, and next steps. Thank you.